Wait. Okay. So Rob, so a few things I will probably translate as we go by, just for some people to maybe get ready. The system is able to translate, but sometimes it doesn't really work so well. And there's a few details that may not be working so perfect. So if you start hearing some Spanish, don't worry about it. All right.
That's fine.
So let me introduce you. I will introduce you in Spanish though. Okay.
Well, it's a little bit early.
Yeah, actually, yeah, you're right. We still have 4 minutes because I did tell everybody. So let's wait. And let me can we take out the air conditioner? So what have you been doing anyway?
Oh, I've been very busy. I've been working on a project in Denmark.
In Denmark?
Yeah, I've been to Europe a lot of times this year.
All right. I will be going there in December. Where in Europe are you where are you going?
I was in Copenhagen.
In Copenhagen. Okay.
Yeah. I see that Vaslak and Kasudas went to Korea.
Yeah, I was invited, but I had actually a scientific meeting here, and I was part of the organizers.
I told them next time they go, I want to go with them.
Well, actually, I told him the same. I mean, this year was impossible for me to make it, but hopefully next year. So I'll let you know, so we could probably go together.
Yeah, I should be retired next year.
Oh, that's good. I wish I could get there. Still a long way to go. But
I'm older than you.
Yeah, well, you know, my kids are still too young, so I need to make money to be able to.
I understand. I understand.
To send them to school. So anyway, yeah, I told him that next year, I mean, if they make another event in Korea, that would be great to see.
Well, we can get into it later, but I was living in Korea for a year, a long time ago, 1982. Oh. That's where I first saw bonsai trees and got interested in them. Back in 1983.
Where, in Seoul?
Yeah, in Seoul. They've been doing bonsai in Korea for a long time. They have some great stuff.
Yeah. I know they do. Actually, I've seen some of especially the pines. And this is going to come up in the conversation later on about black pines. Okay.
Well, you know, Korean hornbeam. It's Korean.
Yeah, Korean hornbeam. But they do produce very nice Japanese black pines, and I got one of them. So they make these beautiful shocking black pines, and I was like, wow.
Yeah, they have. They also have. There's a variety of pine called the Korean pine. It looks a lot like the Japanese black pine.
All right.
And, in Japan, because the trunks are pretty good and they can collect them, they graft Japanese black pine onto the Korean pine to get the fat trunks.
Yeah. I mean, that's a fast way to get there, right? Yeah, and I know the weather is a bit colder than the tropical weather that we have, so I never tried Korean hornbeams in tropical weather.
No, don't bother.
Right.
Maybe, I don't know if we have anybody from Argentina or Chile. They can probably grow.
Yeah, we do have. Yeah, we do have a lot of them. Hold on, we're actually recording.
It's almost 8 o'clock, so I'll let you get started.
So it's still 1 more minute, just because usually people start, you know, they will end up coming in a little bit late anyway. And this thing is recorded, later is edited, and eventually one day it's put into YouTube, and the collection is archived for the FELAP webpage. So one of the ideas that I had was to be able to have several subjects and people that are into bonsai. So when people want to know about somebody or want to know about certain techniques or certain species, they can go back to those videos and get some inside information.
Good idea.
So some people do demos, some people talk about different aspects. So let me introduce you. Bueno, bienvenidos a todos a otro Bonsai al Día. Hoy tenemos el gusto de tener aquí a Robert Kempinski. Robert Kempinski ha estado en el mundo de bonsai por mucho tiempo. Él estuvo viviendo un tiempo en Japón, en Corea, vive actualmente en Estados Unidos y ha escrito algunos libros de bonsai. Fue presidente de BCI y pues es un honor tenerlo aquí con nosotros para platicar sobre diferentes cosas de bonsai. So, Rob, sorry about that introduction in Spanish.
No problem.
Sometimes people, I mean, a lot of them do manage to speak very well English. However, because it's for a broader audience and is focused mostly on Latin America. So therefore, that's why Spanish is kind of like the big thing. And we will try to put like subtitles later on at some point. That would be probably the best thing. So that's something that we're working on. We already had like Michael and Mauro and a few other people to come and join us here to tell us about different aspects of bonsai. So first of all, I mean, I did a very brief introduction about yourself, but I remember you were living in Japan for some time, and then, as you mentioned, you live in Korea. So, how was your bonsai experience, and what, especially, probably the most important for people is what things do you consider that are important not to do, and what things do you consider important to do in the bonsai world?
Okay. Well, first of all, good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure. I've made several trips to Mexico to do bonsai demonstrations, and I've actually even been to Brazil. Is Brazil part of FILAB?
Yep, it is.
Okay, yeah, even though they speak Portuguese. So I've been doing bonsai for a long time, almost 30 years, and I've had the opportunity to travel all over the world. And through BCI and through other events, I've actually been to every continent now, except for Antarctica. There's no trees in Antarctica. To either teach, lecture, demonstrate about bonsai. I've even published a book about bonsai. It's available on Amazon if anybody wants to get it. It is in English. And because of that experience, and another interesting fact is I live in Florida in the USA. Florida's climate is significantly different than the rest of the United States. We are semi-tropical. You want me to stop for translating, or?
No, that's fine. I mean, this part is okay. So básicamente nos está hablando que Rob vive ahorita en un lugar semitropical en Florida. Don't worry about it, Rob. Just continue. This is fine.
So what that means for me is that I have a slightly different approach from even guys like Mauro and Tony Tico, those guys in Europe, because we have such a long growing season. And we can take advantage of that growing season. I like to tell people that if you wanted to be an Olympic downhill skier, you wouldn't live in Florida, you'd go live in the Alps. But if you want to grow quickly and nice bonsai trees, you need to live in the tropics, because we can get twice as much, sometimes 3 times as much growth. For example, I did a program in northern Scotland. Mm-hmm. And the approach to the trees there is so much different than the approach that we have in the tropics. You don't cut everything off and grow it back. You have to take advantage of what you have, and you have to wire it. So in essence, if you have a pine tree, a juniper that has long foliage, you have to use wire to compact it. You have to create a lot of wiggles, because you're just not able to totally grow a new branch like you could potentially do with a tropical tree.
Yeah, but that's actually a problem with regard to design, because eventually, and this is a problem in Europe sometimes when they do the designs, that they do wiggle quite a lot, and they put like a top branch all the way to make like the first branch, and it looks, for the picture point of view, it looks great, but when you analyze the tree, it looks a little bit artificial.
Exactly. I went to the Ginkgo, the last Ginkgo exhibition they had about, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago. And particularly in demonstrations, the Europeans, in my opinion, are too interested in instant bonsai. They are trying to create magic and have a tree that looks, almost finished. And to do that, in my opinion, they break a lot of rules. So they had this one pine tree that had a side branch that came up like this. And then they had on that one branch, they made like a cone. And they had all the shoots and then they wired them. And then, like you say in a picture, it looked pretty good. But if you ever studied that tree, you could see the design was very weak. But that's a limitation sometimes of having a short growing season.
Yes, of course, of course, of course. And some of the species, like some of the conifers that you can only do certain things. I mean, Japanese and a lot of Asians, they do a lot of, you know, they do put branches where they didn't have any. They do change a lot of cosmetics into it, but still it does take a long time for
Well, so talking about what you shouldn't do and couldn't do, and this is another interesting observation, I think, since I've been around the world. In Japan and in Taiwan and in China now, and to some degree in Indonesia and Malaysia, they are getting a vertically integrated market. By that, I mean, and by the way, we don't have this in the United States. What I mean by a vertically integrated market is that you have farmers that grow trunks with the intention to make bonsai. You have an intermediate developer that will develop the branches in the right spot to create good bonsai. And then you have the fine artists that refine them. We don't really have that in America. Most of the fine trees are being collected from the wild, and they're basically raping the countryside to take, ancient trees, and a lot of them die. And so as a something for Latin America and America to consider is, if you're interested in developing bonsai, think about a vertically integrated market. So for instance, Enrique, I've been to your house and you have a vertically integrated market. You have a lot of trees that are growing in the ground, some of them from cuttings, right?
Yeah, actually I have thousands of them from cuttings, especially like Premna. Premna, they grow very
quickly. Me too. I have I'm the Premna king in Florida.
I know, and I will come up with some questions as to how you have solved certain things, because I remember Dominican Republic, they have some problems, but we'll go back into that.
Okay, I think the best thing to do is to have people in each of the countries in PLAB and in the United States and all the different states to do a vertically integrated market. Somebody needs to develop trunks. Yes. You can't steal everything from the wild. Eventually, 1,000-year-old trees are going to run out. You have to develop a market that people grow trunks, and then they can also you have fine trees too. So even individuals can do it. So if you have the land, you should take cuttings and stuff and put them in the ground.
Exactly.
And let them develop so that, you're working with interesting material, because bonsai is a form of sculpture. And, Michelangelo was not going to make the Pieta from a little pebble. He started with a massive chunk of marble, and you have to have good material to, in essence, have the best possible bonsai. It's okay to learn on little sticks in a pot, but if you really want to create world-class bonsai, then you need to have good material. As an example, I only have 2 junipers in my collection, even though junipers are great bonsai material. And the reason is, it's almost impossible to find world quality trunks in Florida of juniper. Because, if you think about it, the Shimpaku junipers in Taiwan and Japan are magnificent. The juniper sabinas that they have in Europe, the collector ones, they're really fantastic. And we have them in the United States, but they don't grow in Florida. They grow in the mountains of, the Rocky Mountains. There might be some in Mexico in the mountains. I'm sure there are. That people, but again, how many times can you collect from the wild before you totally deplete the resource? So as a general advice, if you don't have a vertically integrated market, develop one in your own yard and grow material. You have to be patient, and if you're getting to be up in the age like we are, and you don't have the time, then one thing that's nice about bonsai is you can exchange dinero, right? Isn't that money? You can exchange money for time. It's one of the few things in life where you can, I like to play golf, and there's no way I could go buy a new golf swing. But if I had the money, I could go buy a good trunk, and I could develop, an interesting bonsai. So I think that's the number one lesson. If you want to have great trees, you have to have great material.
Yeah, actually, some people have started to do that in Latin America. I remember in Brazil, Francisco Correa, the owner of this museum of bonsai. He started, I mean, he planted lots of little trees about 20 years ago. And now he has great material, and everybody's like, "Oh wow, that's wonderful material," and stuff like that. But it takes time, actually. I mean,
Yeah, is he the guy with the dwarf powder puffs?
Yeah, he has dwarf power
Yeah,
because
junipers too. Yeah, I
he
think
has junipers. He has a lot of different species.
when I went to Brazil, I think I worked on. He provided the material to Mario Wheel. So
Yeah, probably because
I met him.
yeah, he used to work with Mario. So and Mario started to doing all these seminars, in May at his place.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. So then I guess the next thing is that FELAB is a great organization, but I think that all bonsai artists should be involved in their local organizations too. Because I started doing bonsai way back in the early 90s by myself, and I was reading books. I read Peter Chan's book and Peter Adams' book from the UK. And then it wasn't until I joined the local club here in Florida, I moved from Texas to Florida, that I really got to see what other people do, and my learning curve went way up, you know. So as a beginner or maybe intermediate, if you are not a member of a local club, then you really should consider. Now, if you don't have people in your area, then the next best thing, I guess, would be the internet. And that is join some of these professionals. There are professionals, I believe, in Latin America too, that are teaching, right, in Spanish. I mean, Nacho, I think, has a class, right? And there's others, I'm sure.
Yes, Sergio and several people are starting to do that. We're actually also thinking of doing some better, more integrative educational system, but that's something on the works. You are right. I mean, basically, one of the things about having being on your own little world versus actually knowing other people's experiences, it does help a lot. I mean, that's actually the reason why I started a club here in Mexico, because I wanted not my experience, but I wanted to get all other people's points of view, other people's knowledge about the species that they have local and things like that. So it actually helps you move much faster, right? Actually,
and then there's other benefits too. I mean, you could collectively buy soil, and you could go collecting collectively. You can make it a social function. So, I'm not sure what the situation is in all the different countries, but it's definitely worthwhile doing.
Yes, definitely. It always depends upon how it's made, and there's so many differences, and some of them become very social. And that's one of the things that I liked in Florida. I remember in one of the clubs, they had this thing which they had like the general and the more advanced sections. And because I remember when I was there doing some workshops with people, and I was doing a workshop with the more advanced people as well. And they had this difference to be able to get the people to be moving forward, to continuously moving forward.
And so in addition to clubs, you can also have study groups too.
Yeah.
A study group is, like you say, more serious people. They don't necessarily have to be advanced, because they'll learn.
Yeah.
But they get together separately, and the way we do it is, people bring their own trees. We meet at someone's house, and then we put a tree up, and everybody talks about that one tree, whatever. Then we put up another tree, and pretty much everybody talks about the tree. Then everybody works on the tree, and we help each other. So then I guess the next thing that's very important to me is that having done bonsai for a while, I've hopefully transcended the craft and have gotten into the art. And to me, bonsai is much more an art than it is a craft at this point. And in my mind, what makes bonsai an art is that when you create a bonsai, you need to have an artistic idea or an artistic ideal in mind. So for example, what do I mean by that? Well, everybody says we want to make a tree look old, right? But that's just one potential design goal. We want to make something look, timeless. Like take a ficus tree and have all those aerial roots like it's growing on a temple. But you could take a bougainvillea and you don't want to make it look old. You might want to emphasize the color that comes with the flowers. And so the design technique with that, or you could go beyond just the morphology of the tree and you could think about the emotion that you're trying to convey. So as an example, if you Google my name and the Kraken, you'll see that I have a bonsai tree that I designed to be a sea monster. The Kraken is, a Norwegian sea monster. I wiggled all the branches and I didn't think about a tree at all when I was designing that tree. I was thinking about a sea monster. And so, and in that particular case, and it looks pretty good. In fact, the guy made me an offer, Enrique, on that tree that I couldn't refuse. And I sold it for a lot of money.
There you go. That's good. Let me do a little bit of translation on this because these people may just to make sure that people understand it.
Okay, go ahead.
Entonces, una de las cosas que él considera importante que él ya avanzó es el principio. Muchos de nosotros empezamos que el bonsai de una forma clásica, de forma medio artesanal, en donde estamos tratando de copiar un poco lo que ya existe en otras partes, en Japón, en Corea, en Taiwán, etcétera. Pero eventualmente esto se convierte en arte. Uno ya quiere pensar más en las emociones y no necesariamente como un árbol viejo, sino cuál es el sentimiento que queremos dar. Si queremos dar, por ejemplo, con una bugambilia, las flores que nos representen, que nos digan algo, que nos motiven de algo, o un ejemplo que le estaba dando sobre uno de sus árboles que le llamó Kraken, que es este monstruo mítico, el cual él estaba pensando en el diseño de este árbol, no tanto como este monstruo, no tanto como bonsai. Entonces, a veces eso es una parte importante de nuestro avance de forma de pensar en el mundo de bonsai. Sorry about that, Rob. So, yeah, actually, I'm also moving myself upon that, starting to think in more modern pieces. But I think the first step, usually like in painting, like if you think of Picasso didn't start doing these weird paintings. He started with classical, more for people to actually understand and to be able to say, okay, yeah, he's good at it. And then you begin to move into a much more your field of what you think the artist actually should be.
And so I would agree, you have to kind of understand the basics. You have to understand the horticulture. Number one, you have to keep the tree alive because bonsai is a partnership with the living organism. And I have to say, there's really nothing natural about a bonsai. It's all man-made, human-made. And if you're just beginning, your goals could be pretty simple. Number one, learn. So I need to learn some of the rules, left, right, back branch, or whatever. Although I'll say that at least 1/3 of my trees, the number one branch is in the back, which, is breaking a main rule, right? But sometimes you have to work with what the material is and the design concept. Sometimes you want to break the rules. So when you're learning about these rules and how they apply to bonsai, there's a couple of key points I would keep in mind. From an artistic point of view, I'm not going to say left, right branch. So number one is harmony and rhythm. Okay, to me, harmony is there rhythm in the tree? By that is, does the line or the shape of the tree be consistent? Do you have a wiggly trunk with
esta parte del diseño y es importante tener en cuenta que si uno tiene un tronco que tiene mucho movimiento, pues tiene que ser concordar con las ramas que también deben de representar lo mismo, porque están en el mismo ambiente. En el caso de un árbol que crece recto, pues las ramas también tienen que ser rectas para que tenga concordancia de todo el diseño. Before we continue, there's a question about the representation of the species if it is essential to represent, or do you think it's important to represent the species within the bonsai? I mean, to me, in particular, for example, if I think of bougainvillea is not really a tree, so but we shape it into like a tree. But some people,
so in other words,
some people do like to think like, oh, this is the species, you know, maple, and it has to look like a maple.
Right. I would say that's only one answer. Yes, you could do that. If that is your design goal, if that's your artistic expression, that you want to make a miniature maple tree, fine. By the way, what is a miniature maple tree? If you go walk in the woods, you're going to see a lot of different varieties of trees. Okay. So, but that is a pure goal. You might want to make an old maple tree. And old trees, I'm talking really old trees, 100, 300-year-old trees, they have what? Hollow trunks. Nobody in Japan does a Japanese maple with, well, I won't say nobody because there are some. Very few Japanese maples have hollow trunks, but in reality, really old trees have hollow trunks, even the maples. So the Japanese maples that you see that, form, they're really mature, but not old trees. Now, you could take a maple tree and you might want to make it look like, something that was living in Ukraine right now that got bombed by the Russians, that has a lot of damage on it. That might be your artistic goal. It doesn't have to look anything like a tree. It could look like a tree that got damaged by the wild. You might want to make a maple that is looking like it's cascading down a cliff, that got run over by an avalanche or something. So again, making a tree look like it looks in the wild, the prototypical wild tree is a good goal, but it's not the only goal. And I would say go beyond that goal.
Yes.
Go ahead. I'll let you.
Yes. Also depends upon your knowledge on the nature, right? Because
you got to observe when you drive around in your car, walk around the woods, look at the trees. Yes. You'll be surprised how much variety there is.
Exactly. Entonces, una de las cosas que nos platica es sobre esta parte de las especies. Muchas veces pensamos en querer copiar la naturaleza de la especie particular para representarla, y eso está bien si ese es el goal, el objetivo que uno tiene. La realidad depende mucho de cada persona, qué objetivo tenga con crear el diseño que tiene en mente con su especie. Algo importante que mencionar dentro de bonsai es que lo que buscamos es crear algo artístico que nos haga sentir una emoción a través del diseño de un árbol contenido en un recipiente. So, Rob, you continue?
Yeah, I mean, remember when my first trip to Mexico, you took me out to see Chichen Itza?
Yep.
That inspired me in my demo, to design a black olive. Mm-hmm. Now they call it what, Terminalia Molinia something?
Terminalia Molinetti.
Yeah, to look like Chichen Itza. That was my design goal, and I think it came out pretty good because that trunk kind of made steps just like the side of the pyramid. So anyway, that's key to me, is that if you want to be an artist, you have to have a goal. Don't just let things happen. You need to be able to see several years in the future. Okay. And you can learn the craft, about where the branches go and all that other stuff. The next aspect of what I think people should do is I think you should have a variety of trees in your collection too. Don't just specialize on one type. I mean, you can, but it's good to practice on different species because they behave differently. I'm not a real big fan of compound leaf trees, like, any legume, the Brazilian rain tree or whatever, but they can make nice bonsai. They just, take extra technique. By the way, I don't know if you can see, but I went and grabbed my book. That's the Kraken right there. So it kind of looks like a monster.
Yep, yeah, really nice, really nice.
And just show you. Okay, so as far as developing bonsais too, I like to think of it as a bonsai art cycle. Don't be in a hurry. So when you first start a tree, you want to establish the roots and the trunk. So if you just go buy a tree from a nursery, I'm assuming that this is not an already finished tree. But if you get something from the wild that you collect, or you dig it up from a yard, or you buy from a nursery, you always look at the roots and the trunk. and put that tree in a bigger pot. And let the roots and the trunk develop and let the main branches start to grow. That's like what I call phase one. When you're happy with the size of the trunk, and you have to put it in a big pot, because as soon as you put a tree in a smaller pot, the trunk is really going to stop growing. It's not going to put on the girth. Even if you grow sacrifice branches, the trunk will be very much slowed down. So phase two, now that you have the trunk where you want it and branches where you want it, now you start working on taper of the branches. So if you live in a tropical climate, you can do clip and grow, where you let a branch grow fat, cut it back, let it grow, cut it back, and therefore you gradually get these steps. That's kind of phase two. And you're using wire to put the branches where you want. You could even use guy wire. The wire doesn't have to be that perfect at this stage because the tree, is in your garden. Should I stop there for translation?
Yeah. Also probably there's a point before I translate, because I think this is a mistake that a lot of people do, that they do wire too much at an early stage. Instead of allowing it to get thicker, to get taper, they want all these little branches to be exactly in the position where they should be. But these branches are actually going to be cut down when you want them to actually taper, or they're going to take forever to be able to get some thickness. So let me go back to translate. Sí, entonces una de las cosas importantes que considera Rob cuando uno esté manejando sus bonsáis es, sea de donde vengan, si sea del vivero, si sea colectado, si se ha crecido en la casa, el primer paso es tratar de manejar el sistema radicular. El sistema radicular, un buen sistema radicular, que es también lo que hacen los asiáticos. Los primeros años ellos se enfocan, no les importa tanto las ramas, no les importa tanto el resto del árbol, pero sí la parte de las raíces. Tener un buen sistema radicular permite que sea eficiente y que el tronco pueda crecer, y para eso recomienda que sea en un contenedor bastante grande. Si se pone en un contenedor pequeño, pues todo el crecimiento se reduce y no ayuda. Y las ramas igual, al principio no se requiere un alambrado muy preciso, pero nada más es posición de las ramas para dejar crecer, engrosar, cortar, dejar crecer, y eso ayuda para poder tener una conicidad adecuada. Y de lo que yo estaba mencionando es que uno de los problemas que sí he visto mucho en Latinoamérica, sobre todo que es bastante novedoso, es que se colectan árboles muy masivos, empiezan a tener pequeñas ramitas, y lo primero que se quiere es ya tener el diseño de esas ramitas lo más perfecto posible. Y es una forma de engañarnos, porque ese diseño luce bonito aparentemente, pero para que crezcan y gruesen esas ramas va a tomar décadas o más de décadas, que si tratamos de empezar de esta forma, que es la forma más rápida. So back to you, Rob.
Well, I'm just going to show you another picture. Hopefully it works.
All right.
Does that look okay on the screen?
Yeah, I can see phase one, phase two.
That's the art cycle that I'm talking about. Okay. So once you're past phase two, once the tree has branches and roots the way you like them, now you start developing ramification or the refinement. Ramification is when the branch goes and splits and then splits again, like a fission reaction. And on a good tree, if you count, being that I'm an engineer, I always like to put things in numbers. You could have up to 17 levels of ramification. Go from the trunk and hit a branch, 1. Go out to the next branch, 2, and all the way if you can get the 12 to 17, you have a very finely ramified tree, and that's the end of stage 3.
Mm-hmm. So
and then go ahead.
So, entonces, básicamente en su libro ahí tiene la parte de las fases que él menciona, y una vez que ya tenemos la parte de las ramas que han engrosado lo suficiente, el siguiente paso pues es generar la parte de ramificación. Entonces, ramificación es cuando se va dividiendo, y menciona que una vez que pasa de 12 a 17 ramificaciones, ya tiene una ramificación adecuada, madura ese árbol.
And then stage 4 is pretty simple show. The tree is ready to be put in an exhibition, and in that case, you can use a smaller pot. You can put the tree in a smaller pot, and now you're just really working on the fine details. you should never, for instance, have a guy wire. You know what I mean by a guy wire? Straight piece of wire, pulling a branch down in a show. Because in my mind, that means the tree is not ready. It's still in stage 3. You can have fine wire on the branches to position them in a show. That's okay. It's not ideal in my opinion, but it's okay. I like to, when I showed my really big pine tree at the National Exhibition a few years ago, I took all the wire off the tree. Some of the branches moved a little bit, but not that much. And the picture you put on the introduction for this, that was that pine tree. That picture, the tree has no wire on it in that picture. So that's stage 4.
Ok, entonces una vez que ya logramos esta parte de ramificación, el siguiente paso ya es tenerlo en forma ideal como para show, para fotografía, para concurso, para sentirnos que ya es un verdadero bonsai. Y eso, y en este caso, él lo considera que ya es un bonsai maduro, una vez que ya no tenemos que tener estos cables para poder sujetar las ramas y mover posición. Puede tener un poco de alambrado, el alambrado fino, y sobre todo en Japón se utiliza mucho en algunas especies alambrado fino, o alambrado para exhibición. Pero de preferencia, pues si ya puede estar sin él, pues quiere decir que ya ha llegado a un nivel más maduro. Actually, that reminds me of Danny from Ginkgo. He also mentioned the same thing about the trees. When they're really ready, they should be without any wire to be present.
Oh, he said that?
Yeah, he said that.
Yeah. Yeah, and so, and I tell you, I have a lot of trees, not as many as you, but I have a lot, several hundred, maybe up to 400. I can't put wire on and take wire off. It's just, working full time. So a lot of times I just use clip and grow, and I do wire a lot of trees, but if you leave the wire on. So, but back to the cycle, I just want to make another point. Notice I have the cycle is a circle. So sometimes with some trees, particularly tropical trees that grow fast, they sometimes get out of shape when you try to keep them in stage 4. Mm-hmm. Like typical, you guys can grow Casuarina equisetifolia. Yeah. So Casuarina is such a vigorous grower that the top will gradually lose the taper of the tree. So the cycle means you may not have to go back to phase 1, but you sometimes may have to go back to phase 2. I have a Casuarina now. I'm gonna have to go back to phase 2 and re-chop it and chop the branches off and regrow it. So that's something to keep in mind.
That's part of the evolution, right, of the trees. I mean, they continue to grow, they're living, and they're continually evolving. Let me just translate that. Una de las cosas importantes, sobre todo nosotros que estamos creciendo árboles en el trópico, es que a veces tienen un desarrollo muy rápido. Y una vez que llegamos a esa etapa aparentemente final, pues el árbol sigue viviendo, sigue creciendo, y en algunos casos su desarrollo puede ser bastante fuerte, como él menciona, por ejemplo, en una especie de casuarina. Casuarina tiene un crecimiento apical bastante vigoroso, lo cual puede hacer que cambie el diseño completamente, y a veces hay que regresar a la etapa 2 o 3 para volver a rediseñar el nuevo árbol.
Just one more thing, if you can see on the cycle, notice that I also have an off arrow.
Okay.
And by that, I mean, sometimes trees die.
Yep.
Can't help it.
It's part
or
of life.
Sometimes portions of a tree die. Like I had a triple trunk pine tree, and the secondary trunks were nice, but the main trunk died. The other 2 trunks did. So you have to sometimes, deal with it. You either throw the tree away or restyle it or whatever. So that's also a fact of life. We don't intentionally kill trees, but it occasionally happens, So
yeah. So that happens to everyone, and that is like at any doctor. I mean, not all the patients. If you're in emergency and you're in a ward, not everybody's going to survive, right? I mean, we tend to think that we want them to be always growing forever and ever, but the reality is that there's many type of things that we don't have control, right? Like bacterial infections, like fungal infections. We may try to control them, but just like for us, we may get sick even though we try to take some medication.
But I think from a practical point of that is sometimes trees need a rest.
Yeah.
small pot is tough on a tree. You know, it gets root bound or whatever. Sometimes you have to take the tree out of the small pot and put it in a bigger pot. And for show-in trees, the small trees, this is very important because the small pots are really small. Another technique you could do is you could take the small pot and you could put a bigger pot, a plastic pot or, you know, clay cheap pot with soil in it and let the roots grow through the hole into the bigger pot so that the tree can retain its health. It's very important, I think, for smaller trees.
Yeah, that's a good way to fool the trees into thinking that they're in a bigger environment, right?
Yeah,
Let me do
exactly.
the translation of this. Una de las cosas que menciona también para los árboles shohins o árboles pequeños, que muchos de nosotros hacemos es engañar al árbol de que no esté con el estrés hídrico y de temperatura que tiene una maceta pequeña con poco sustrato. Si nos ponemos en una maceta mucho más grande, un contenedor más grande con mayor cantidad de sustrato, las condiciones son mucho más suaves, no hay tanta pérdida de agua, cambios de temperatura y el árbol crece mejor y se desarrolla mejor. So,
the next thing I'd like to talk about, Enrique, if I can, is how do people grow their trees? I have been to many gardens where the garden looks like, you know, a mess. The trees are crowded on a table, they don't get enough room, they're not getting enough light. So my point of view is that the display of bonsai trees, not just in a show, but display starts with your backyard, okay? I'm assuming that everybody's growing bonsai has a place to grow them. And so you should put almost as much thought into where your trees are growing and the conditions that they grow in and how pleasing is it to the eye as you would to growing the tree. Because think about it. The tree is going to spend 99.999% of its life in the garden. It may only go to the show for a little. And if you want to have a nice tree, you should have it in a nice presentation in the garden. You shouldn't have a cheap looking bench with everything crowded. You shouldn't have weeds. This is a big pet peeve of mine. I would say that if you walked out in my garden, out of 400 trees, you might find one weed that grew up while we were sitting here in this conversation. I weed my trees every day. And as a result, I only find one weed, you know, if you leave your trees grow. So how you display trees in your garden, the sunlight, how much water do they get? I use both a sprinkler system from the city water, and I have a well with a pump, and then I hand water, and I tailor my watering to each species. So I could stop there. I'll talk a little bit more about that though.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a good point also because it allows people to think the next step, if they go to a convention, having them presented in their house allows them to think as to what trees go to with what trees, what type of shapes, what type of sizes go with what, how does that is presented properly, right? Because sometimes in conventions we don't have this good presentation that could be done. But anyway, let me
I'm talking about way before the convention. I'm talking
yeah. But if you're beginning to do it at home, you already begin to get these skills. You begin to get some of these skills as to how to present this better and to know what things go better. And also, I don't know if you read one of these articles that I wrote about the tree enemies. And this helps with some of that, which has to do with how people judge you from outside, because if you just have a mess there, they don't really see this art, they don't see this beauty, they don't see just one tree, they see the whole mess. And this obviously goes back in psychologically in other people, but let me do the translation on your part. So, una de las cosas que menciona que es importante es no solo nada más enfocarnos en lo que son nuestros árboles, sino también en los jardines que tenemos o en el lugar donde tenemos los árboles, cómo están presentados, si tienen muchas hierbas, si están todos desorganizados, etcétera. Algo que él menciona que ha visto en muchos lugares es que la mayoría de los lugares no está muy bien arreglado. Y es el lugar donde más tiempo pasamos con nuestros árboles y podría generar una muy buena presentación. Si pensamos en cómo podría estar presentado, no solo para nosotros, sino para cualquiera, ayuda bastante porque permite ver cómo interacciona mejor visualmente esto, si están recibiendo luz adecuadamente, si están recibiendo el agua, dependiendo de la especie, tamaño, etcétera. Entonces, tener un buen arreglo ayuda a mejorar no solo la estética del lugar, sino también en la salud de los árboles. So, back to you.
So that's the display. Then I actually had a whole PowerPoint presentation about display because I have some very different ideas. But let's not get there. Okay, let's stick to bonsai. So different ideas. Okay, that's the next main point. Don't be afraid to experiment. Try different things. So particularly with Latin America, where your species are relatively new to the bonsai world. I mean, Enrique, some of the trees that you've grown from the Yucatan, like Enrique Beltrana, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's you started probably bonsai with, that species. So try species local to your area, see how they do. They may or may not work. Then again, they may work fine. Try grafting, try doing different techniques of with grafting to see if grafting works, to change leaves, to change fruit, to change foliage. It may or may not work, but grafting is a good technique to learn, particularly as you get more advanced. Try making mixed tree plantings. Try growing different species to create, if you want to create like the vision of the forest and you want to have something low in the ground. I kind of like that. I presently have a native Florida tree, a Pinus salatii, which is we call slash pine, has very long needles. The needles are probably 40 centimeters, they're very long. Most people would say, but pine trees shouldn't have long needles. I say baloney. I'm styling this tree to take advantage of the long needles. So I made a weeping style pine tree. And it turns out that even though this tree is only 22 years old now, it has fantastic bark. Slash pine grows bark very fast. And the bark looks almost as old. But if I had just listened to the rule and said, oh, it's got long needles, don't bother, or graft, Japanese black pine, which may or may not work. It has never worked for me. So I experimented with the new species. So that's another recommendation I would make is experiment.
Yeah. That's actually interesting. Also, the thing you mentioned about the species. One of the first species that I tried when I came here to Yucatan was Mahonia. Mahonia has very nice little leaves. Actually, it has two types of leaves, whether they're just new foliage growing or if there's older foliage. And I thought, wow, it has very nice wood, small leaves, interesting species. It grows so slow. If I would have just kept on that species alone, I have one tree after 20 years is beginning to look like something maybe, because it grows almost like, I don't know, a couple of millimeters of thickness, the branch every year. So it's really slow. If I would have just stayed with that species, and then it would have been the end of me. So yeah, trying different species, local species or different, it does help a lot to be able to see what works well for one. Let me do this translation part. Entonces, una de las cosas que menciona es probar diferentes especies, no casarnos necesariamente con una, ver qué hay en nuestras zonas. Latinoamérica es muy rica en una gran variedad de especies que podemos utilizar para el arte de bonsai. Muchas de ellas, o la gran mayoría de ellas, desconocidas en el mundo de bonsai. Sin embargo, no quiere decir que no sean muy buenos candidatos. La cuestión es hacer experimentos y probar y ver qué es lo que funciona, probar haciendo uniones, haciendo cortes, haciendo diferentes técnicas, ver qué cosas resiste, qué cosas no. Y es el trabajo pionero que a veces hacemos para definir si algo es útil o no dentro de bonsai. No todo lo que tiene hojas pequeñas y corteza y madera es necesariamente útil para bonsai. Hay varias especies y yo he tratado de manejar algunas de ellas que toman décadas para poder desarrollar casi cualquier nivel. Actually, there's another species that I tried. I found, and it's a common species over here, but it grows about an inch every 2-3 years. Of quite, so I found, that like this little shocking, already kind of in the wild, and I was, oh, this is nice. I will just cut back and make some ramification. It takes forever to get into that stage, even into bigger pots or whatever. So
well, this is why Enrique, I like Premna.
Yeah.
Premna and also Australian pine, they're just the opposite. If you first looked at Premna in the wild, the leaves are they're big, but they can get, once you start working on them, they get amazingly small and they grow fast. They're easy to cultivate. So anyway.
So that's a good point, and it's a good species to talk about, because a lot of people do have Premnas in Latin America, but there is one problem, and I remember one big problem in the Dominican Republic, and they're actually about to give up growing Premnas because of whitefly. And I don't know if you have any suggestion as to how to deal with whitefly, because it does kill. Over there, I saw a lot of interesting trees kind of already dead and not doing too well.
Well, believe it or not, I've never had a whitefly problem in Florida. First of all my trees are outside.
Mm-hmm. And this can be kind of a problem, because after a few times that they defoliate a tree, the tree begins to weaken quite a lot. And they like Premnas for whatever reason.
Probably because of the smell. I don't think they smell bad, but they have a distinctive smell.
Yeah, they have a distinctive smell, but they do like it. I'm actually working on something for whitefly. I don't have that big of a problem, but in Dominican Republic, I saw it on so many species, even species that you would never get to see whitefly, like Conocarpus, like buttonwood.
Wow.
I mean, it was impressive to see this particular. They might have already treated with so many pesticides that they may be resistant to all of these things.
I don't like chemicals. I trust the amount of chemicals I use, mostly because they're bad even for humans.
Yeah, of course.
So now you mentioned, I don't know how much time we have, Enrique. You wanted to talk about pine trees?
Yes, actually, that we have about 10 more minutes at least. So one of the important things here is also the black pines, because you are an expert of growing black pines outside the normal typical scenario of growing black pines. And a lot of people that are in the tropics, I mean, we do like to be growing some of the black pines. So what recommendations would you give? What things you...
Right. So where I live, we are at the very southern range of Japanese black pine. And Japanese black pine in Japan do grow pretty much on the coast. And since Japan is an island, the coast doesn't get as cold as some of the, and Japan actually goes from Okinawa to Hokkaido. Japan goes from Florida to Maine. I mean, it's a pretty long stretch, even though they happen to be islands. So the number one thing with Japanese black pine is water. In the tropics, we get a lot of rain. And so you have to accommodate the watering. The pine trees like to get a little dry. The soil gets a little dry before they get watered again. They don't like to be totally wet. So what do you do in the tropics when you get rain every day? You have to go to inorganic granular soil. You have to use big particles and no organic matter. So you can't use pine bark, you can't use topsoil. You have to use, I use a 3-way mix of akadama. It's expensive, but I buy it. But I help with the expense by mixing it with pumice and with lava.
How much of
So-
lava, how much of pumice do you use?
1/3, 1/3, 1/3.
1/3. A simple thing. All right.
Simple mix. So do you want to translate that, or is that pretty
Yep,
obvious?
yeah. Let you just let me just try it. So una de las cosas para que he encontrado para desarrollar pino negro japonés en lugares tropicales es que requieren entre cada riego pues llegar a secarse, y es un problema en lugares tropicales donde tenemos tanta lluvia. Entonces, una de las recomendaciones que él da es utilizar un sustrato inerte, carente completamente de materia orgánica, que permita una buena filtración de agua. Principalmente él utiliza acadama, jal o tepoxil, o tiene varios nombres, y tezontle, que también le llamamos lava, etcétera, que uno es la parte volcánica roja y el otro es la parte volcánica blanca, básicamente 1/3 de cada uno de ellos, y esta mezcla es la que utiliza para crecer los pinos negros. ¿Ok?
So once you have the soil down, then it could rain all at once, and the tree will hopefully stay dry. Now, if you get continual rain, sometimes I have too many trees to do this, but I would move the trees out of the rain.
Okay.
So the trees do need to get. So the next thing with pine trees is, depending on where you live, you're going to get some kind of fungus. So there's a beneficial fungus that grows in the soil, mycorrhiza, that if you can get it is good. It helps the pine tree develop roots. However, you have to be careful with mycorrhiza. I have used some of those mycorrhiza commercial inoculants.
Yep.
And Enrique, I had so much mycorrhiza, it killed the tree. And I actually sent a sample of the mycorrhiza to Nina Shishkoff. Do you know her? She's a mycologist. She works for the U.S. government. And she came back and said it was a pine mycorrhiza, but not the one good for Japanese black pine. And it made like instead of a mushroom, it looked like a ribbon. So you just want to have the natural mycorrhiza, and you can't really do anything you just got to be lucky, but don't use commercial mycorrhiza inoculants. They have too many different fungus that they put in there. Some of them hurt the tree.
Okay, let me translate that because that's kind of important. Entonces, una de las cosas, and just one question before I go into that, about how do you put some of the fertilizers for these trees? Do you use inert, what type of fertilizer?
Yeah, well, the fertilizer, I'm not picky. I use everything. I use liquid, I use inorganic, and I use organic. And I try to rotate it. I like to eat steak, chicken, beef, salad. So, I figure the trees can get, and sometimes I even go buy micronutrients. I don't even know what's in them, but it's trace elements, boron, chromium, whatever. And I give a little bit of that. So yeah, keep the trees well fed.
Yes. Okay, but these organic fertilizers are basically in liquid form. So basically they will drain out, right?
No, I use granulate too.
Oh, well, they would all, it is the same. Eventually, when they dissolve, they will dissolve and they will pass through. It's not like bark or any of these.
No, I don't use bark because it keeps too much water.
All right. Oh, okay. So it's because of the water. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me just translate this. Entonces, en la pregunta del abonado, básicamente, él le gusta abonar con diferentes tipos de cosas. Así como a nosotros nos gusta comer diferente tipo de comida, pues él abona a veces con cuestiones orgánicas, inorgánicas, de liberación lenta, etcétera. La razón por la cual no utiliza la materia orgánica en el sustrato no es tanto por la parte de nutrientes, sino es por la parte de retención de agua. Y algo que menciona es lo de las micorrizas. Las micorrizas, los pinos particularmente utilizan mucho micorrizas para poder absorber adecuadamente muchos de los nutrientes, micronutrientes. Sin embargo, él encontró que algunas de las micorrizas que compró de forma comercial crecen, pero dañan a los pinos. Entonces, no todas las micorrizas son necesariamente útiles para todo tipo de árboles. De hecho, hay una cantidad enorme de especies de micorrizas que son muy específicas para ciertas especies. All right, Rob.
Now, the next thing that's very important with pine trees is when everybody talks about getting small needles and cutting the candles in Japan, we don't live in Japan. Our climate is different. The pine trees really don't go dormant. The whole secret to getting small needles in a pine tree is that when you cut a candle, it takes about 4 months for the new candle to grow and to make needles. So in Japan, if you cut the candles in June, they have July, August, September, and by October, the trees are slowing down. So the needles don't have a full growth season. That's why they cut their candles in June. So in the tropics where I live, I could do two things. I can do 2 cycles a year, or I can wait all the way to August and into September to cut the candles. And that means that they will get September, October, a little bit of November, and by the end of November, for 1 month, the pine trees take a nap. Then they start growing again. So you can't read the Japanese articles and use their timing. You have to find the timing that works in your microclimate.
Okay, so let me translate this part. So, una de las cosas que es importante es los tiempos de poda. Cuando uno quiere ramificar y reducir el tamaño de las espinas de los pinos, eso se logra con una muy buena ramificación y el tiempo adecuado de la poda de las candelas. Normalmente en Japón lo empiezan mucho antes porque requiere de 4 meses de crecimiento. Sin embargo, en su clima particular, pues él puede empezarlo por ahí de agosto para dar tiempo. Y eso permite un mayor crecimiento y desarrollo de las acículas del pino debido a nuestro clima tropical. Entonces, mucho de lo que recomienda es que depende del clima de cada uno de nosotros, cuándo es la mejor época para hacer eso. Uno tiene que estarlo checando. Entonces, lugares tropicales, pues podemos darnos el lujo de tener un poco más de tiempo. Lugares templados, pues hay que reducir la época del año. O sea, antes no esperar hasta agosto, sino tal vez en junio para poder darle el tiempo suficiente que el pino regenere. Okay?
Yeah, and let me back up a step and say the bonsai cycle, the art cycle, is critical for pine trees. If you are trying to develop a pine tree in phase 1 or phase 2, don't worry about needle size. Let the tree grow and prune it like you would any other tree, wherever you want directional pruning. Because as soon as you start working on a pine tree to get small needles, the tree is going to stop growing. The process is really stealing the energy from the roots to make new needles. And timing is everything on a pine tree. It's not like a ficus where you can cut, or a buttonwood where you can cut anytime. You got to be prepared to cut on timing. So when a tree is just developing, don't worry about small needles. You're phase 1, phase 2. When the tree is refined and has the branches, now you can start worrying about needle size.
Entonces, una de las cosas que menciona que estos ciclos que mencionó al principio, de los ciclos de fase 1, 2, 3 y 4, esos son fundamentales con el manejo de los pinos, en donde al principio el desarrollo de ramas y selección, etcétera, no importa tanto qué tan grandes sean esas acículas, qué tan grandes sean esas espinas. No es el momento de estar pensando en cómo hacer la reducción, sino poder enfocarse más en la parte de diseño, y hasta que lleguemos a la fase 4 es cuando uno ya empieza a pensar en la parte de las acículas pequeñas.
And in fact, in my book, I use pine trees as an example to talk about the life cycle. So this is what my book looks like. And you can get it on Amazon. So you could read it, and understand it maybe easier. So let's see. The other thing about a pine, go ahead, Enrique, have a question?
Yeah, I have a question about black pine. Have you tried either there's a variety with small needles. Actually, there's 2 varieties with small needles. Have you ever tried them in the tropics?
The only one I'm trying right now is the Maikawa small variety. And I just got one last year, a good one. And it's interesting because right now the tree is in a big plastic nursery container, not even in a pot, but it's, not even in bonsai soil. So I left it alone.
Which variety did you mention?
Maikawa.
Maikawa.
It's only a small leaf variety. But my point is, I left it alone. I bought the tree in January of last year, and I didn't do anything to it. Because number one, when I do grafting, I want to use some of the shoots that I'm not going to use. So I wanted to save some of the shoots because I have to graft in the winter. Next month, not next month, January is when I graft. So yes, I have tried some small variety, but I tell you, well, I sold the tree about 2 years ago, but I had one where by using my technique, the needles got so small that when Ben Oki, who's no longer with us, he passed away, famous Japanese American artist, when he came to my house, he asked me if that was a white pine. He said, "How are you growing white pine in Florida?" I said, "That's not a white pine, Ben. I have really small needles using the technique I just talked about."
Oh, interesting.
But you can get small needles on any variety as long as you know 4 months. If you don't give the needle 4 months, if you give the needle 2 months, they're going to be really small. But you're also going to weaken the tree. So don't do that every year. So that's another thing. In the tropics, if you want to put a pine tree that's finished in a show and you want to have small needles, depending on when your show is, you backwards plan. So for instance, the picture of the tree that you used on the introduction, that show was in June that year. So I didn't cut my candles in August. I let the tree go through winter. Then I went back 3 months from June. So that would be May, April, March. The beginning of March, I cut the candles on that tree and pulled the old needles off. I gave that tree 3 months before the show to make new candles, and that's how I had small needles. But as soon as I got that tree home, next month, the needles got, a little bit longer because they had full time to grow. And then I left that tree alone that year. The next year I went back. So you can do that in the tropics. You can't do that in Japan. Or you can't do that in New York or California. Well, maybe in California because Southern California. So you got to learn why the tree is doing what it is, and then you can experiment and try different things.
Exactly.
I've actually candle cut in the beginning of November. We're too late. The trees really suffered. I didn't do it to all my trees. I did it to 2 trees as an experiment. So in your local climate, find out when you cut, when you get the best results.
All right. Actually, that's actually interesting. And because I had some help from some of the carpenter ants. They also like the black pine, apparently. So one night I saw it like reduce significantly. So now it's kind of out of their possible for them to eat, but sometimes you do have some unforeseen cuttings. But it's interesting also you have tried like this Mikawa to be, or you're gonna try this Mikawa to be able to graft it onto some normal black pines or some slash pine. Actually, I don't know if it's compatible.
No, not slash pine.
I don't know if it would be compatible with slash pine, but probably with black pine.
Well, for instance, this past weekend, I saw a slash pine trunk that had Florida sand pine grafted onto it. It did okay. The grafts took, but the graft unions were bad. The slash pine grows so fast with the bark, and the sand pine doesn't, that you could see where the grafts go. The branches got fat and barky. And the same thing happens when they graft white pine, white pine and black pine. The trunks don't look like white pine. So, and it kind of gets back to a concept of zone envy. You know what I mean by Enrique, agriculture zone? If you can't grow black pine in your area, don't worry about it. Grow what you can grow. I can't do Japanese maples. I can't do hornbeams. I don't worry about it. I can do ficus, buttonwoods, premnas, there's like 150 trees I can grow. So, don't worry too much about black pine if you can't grow them. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah. Actually, that's another of the things. I mean, we'd like to try and experiment, right? Because you never know what is the range of some species. Some species, for example, I found some of the junipers do survive and do quite well in my weather. I had one juniper, which I doubted when it was sent to me as a gift. I thought, well, this tree is not gonna last, right? And I just left it there. I left it there for 12 years. It's been growing. It's been growing really well. So it's actually time for me to do something good at it because it is already a massive juniper there, but it's from the mountains. It shouldn't really be doing well, but it does. So sometimes we never really know.
Enrique, I tried Rocky Mountain juniper. I tried Mugo pine. I tried a real sad one is azaleas, because azaleas will live 30 miles north of my house, but 30 miles south, it's tropical, they won't live, you know? So you just got to grow what you can grow.
It's interesting because with azaleas, I thought that you would be able to grow them, but you sure you have the correct water? Because
no, not in my backyard.
Yeah, because for me,
remember I have a lake behind my house.
Yeah.
So my backyard is more like Miami.
Yeah.
I don't get any cold weather. It's always moderate and temperate. And tropical trees do great. We didn't translate though. We kind of got into it.
Let me just finish this translation. Entonces, una de las cosas que él recomienda muchas de las especies, a veces de lo que estamos platicando, es probar qué especies funcionan y si algunas especies no tiene uno que crecer pinos negros, no tiene uno que crecer junipers, no tiene uno que crecer maples, uno puede crecer 1000 de otras especies que tenemos accesibles y que tenemos que ir conociendo. Entonces, a veces queremos o envidiamos las especies que tienen otros, pero no apreciamos tanto las especies que tenemos pues, en nuestro patio. Entonces es nada más una de las cosas que lo mejor es pues conocer lo que tenemos y apreciarlo. Okay, Rob, well, that's actually, we're kind of running already late for this time. I don't know if we could probably do maybe another at a later time,
Sure.
In a month or so.
Sure.
I think it would be great because there's.
I'd be curious to know, Enrique, what countries they're on. Is it possible?
Well, yes. I mean, from what I see right now here, we have some from Guatemala, from Puerto Rico, from Colombia, from Mexico, obviously, the Dominican Republic. Let me see, and a few that I do not know. So right now, that's it. Sometimes we get a lot of people from Brazil or from different countries. Venezuela, not so much, but depends upon the day and the time. We just had a change of time in Mexico, and I forgot about it, and that's why we had to reschedule. Okay. But it depends upon that, and usually, because people get to see this later, then they can download it. And
that's fine. I'm just curious.
PhilLab has people from quite a lot of the Latin American countries. We don't have all of the Latin America yet. We're still kind of looking to get more people from different regions, but we're growing.
Well, you know, I like to travel, so I would love to meet these people in person someday at a show or whatever. Just keep me posted.
Well, we will be having a show in Dominican Republic in 2024. So that will be like, we'll have to see. And also next year, we should have an event here in Merida again. So I hope you come to continue working on that Terminalia. That Terminalia, remember that there was a part that we actually cut to be, that we put some moss to be able to make a cutting.
Yeah.
So that cutting I cut down, so now that one is growing well. That's going to make a very.
Which tree was that? On a black olive?
Yeah, on the black olive.
Okay, cool.
So now that's going to be a very nice showing, and then your tree it needs some more work now.
It needs more work. Well, you probably ought to explain something later, but I very much enjoyed talking with you. Bonsai is more hands-on for me, so I would love to work with some of these guys someday. And since I'm retiring in the end of this year, I'll be available anytime, you know.
Well, I think Dominican Republic, we'll see whether next year we can, because on the event we want to have some people to work on the trees before they go. So basically you would be working on the tree that you already worked upon.
Oh, and you come down early, like the year before or something?
Exactly.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, because again, like we talked about earlier, there's no such thing as instant bonsai. You know, you have to work in steps, and you really do the tree a disservice if you try to make it look instant into a bonsai, you know?
Exactly, exactly. And that, because you get a lot more if you get to see what has been done, what has happened after you work upon it, and now the next step. So people get to see more of the following steps of more refinement or more detailed work or different type of things, right?
Right. Enrique, if you want, for another discussion, which we didn't really get into, but the display of bonsai,
Yeah.
not just in the garden, but in shows. I have a PowerPoint that maybe I could send to you, and you could, if you don't mind translating it.
I don't mind translating it, and actually probably I can translate it and we can show it, and with you talking about it. What about that?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So I could do a presentation, but you would have it in Spanish, so it's easy for everybody to understand.
Exactly. Plus you will know it already, because even though it's Spanish, it's your presentation. That sounds like a good idea. I like that idea.
Yeah, okay. So anyway, I'm willing to do that because I have some very, I think they're innovative ideas about display. To me, display of bonsai is a whole different art than growing bonsai.
Great.
And,
yeah, the event in Dominican Republic, we want to make this like a statement, like something new and fresh, not just.
Well, then you definitely need to hear my presentation.
Yeah, because
I've already done it a couple times for other clubs. I did it in Ohio. I did it several times here in Florida, and very well received. So we'll give it a shot.
Good.
I mean, how many people here are Japanese? You know? None. I'm not Japanese. I love Japan. I've spent over a year in Japan. I've been there 32 times. But we don't have to just follow the Japanese way of doing display. There's so much other ways we could do it.
Exactly.
So it's something to think about.
Yeah. Perfect.
Well, everybody, thank you very much. I don't want to keep everybody too long. Muchas gracias.
Thanks, Rob. Thank you very much for this. And yes, we definitely have to do this probably in December or so. Once we get closer to the end of the year, that would be great.
That's fine.
Thank you, Rob.
All right.
Bye.
Adios, amigos.
Adios.
Oh, I recognize him. How you doing? From Puerto Rico.
Gracias por la traducción.